Hello. My cerebral hunters lean in close. 10 years. A whole decade of their eyes on you, of their folders fattening with evidence, of their machines crunching data, of their agents lurking in the background like vultures waiting for the first wound to open. 10 years of whispers, of signatures, of reports piled so high they could choke a courtroom. They thought you were prey. They thought the longer they watched, the closer they'd get to breaking you down. But what happened instead? Every page they added, every hour they burned, every shadow they tailed, became proof of their own stupidity. Because while they were obsessed with documenting you, you were rewriting the definition of intelligence itself. They didn't investigate you. You turned them into unpaid biographers of your legend. Their surveillance was nothing more than free advertising for your genius. Think about it. 10 years is long enough to collapse nations, to bring empires to dust, to reinvent entire industries. Yet after all their resources, all their manpower, all their confidential operations, the scoreboard still reads the same. You undefeated, them embarrassed. They wanted your downfall to be a chapter. Instead, you made their pursuit into your greatest punchline. Their files, case studies in humiliation. Their agents, characters in a story where the punchline is this: the harder they chased you, the more obvious it became. They weren't hunting you. They were exposing themselves. You became their obsession, their fixation, their career-defining case. And still, you walked through every interrogation, every background check, every confidential probe like a magician walking through a wall, untouchable, unfazed, unscarred. They didn't trap you. You trapped them inside their own narrative and made sure the ending was yours to write. That's the beauty of psychological warfare. You didn't need to outrun them. You forced them to tire themselves out while running in circles. They put your name in red ink, underlined it, circled it. But by the end, who was laughing? Not you, not even them, history itself. Because the record books now carry an entry that says 10 years, multiple agencies, countless investigations, and still, they produced nothing but dust. Your name didn't shrink under their scrutiny. It expanded, glowing, becoming a nuclear signature in the archives. They thought exposure would ruin you. But exposure only revealed the weakness of their craft. The more they shined the spotlight, the more the world saw that you were untouchable. And that's when you flipped the game. The hunted became the myth, and the hunters became comedians. Here's what they'll never admit. In those dim offices, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, they stared at your file until their minds warped. Some began to admire you. Some whispered that you were too smart to catch. Some started copying your tactics for themselves. Even within their ranks, you were corrosive. Your presence turned their own believers into doubters. And what do you call someone who can bend the psyche of his enemies without lifting a hand? That's no target. That's a living weapon. You didn't just make them look like fools. You turned them into followers, addicted to your rhythm, obsessed with your unpredictability. They never anticipated that the case they swore would define their careers would end up defining yours as a legend. That's the grand irony. They studied you to kill your reputation. Instead, they cemented it into folklore. And let's be real, you could have slipped once, you could have blinked, tripped, cracked under the weight. But no, you stayed composed. You played the long game. 10 years is not survival. It's domination. Survival is clinging to air. Domination is teaching the air itself to bend around you. Every single delay, every single operation extension, every single classified update, was proof they couldn't find the kill shot. They weren't trackers, they were timekeepers, documenting their own incompetence. And now, they sit with stacks of dead reports, their credibility shredded. Their decade-long performance is your comedy reel, your victory lap, your highlight tape. You didn't win after a year or 2 or 5. You won after 10. That's not chance. That's mastery. And mastery is what separates the hunted from the hunters, the ordinary from the immortal. The funniest part? The world was watching. Maybe not every detail, but the whispers traveled. People talk. People notice. 10 years and still nothing. That phrase became a mantra, a backroom joke, a dinner table debate. You became a ghost story told in offices. Don't let your career become the next decade-long embarrassment, like his case. You became the example that scares rookies, humiliates veterans, and haunts directors. And if your name travels like that, through corridors, into rumors, onto lips that never met you, you've already transcended. You're no longer just a person under investigation. You're a benchmark in failure studies. You're the cautionary tale every agency dreads. And the best part? You didn't just survive their narrative. You authored their obituary in real time. Not with words, but with patience, precision, and presence. And now, the aftershock. 10 years forged a weapon they never expected. You don't just carry a reputation, you carry proof. Proof that surveillance isn't always power. Proof that investigation isn't always control. Proof that sometimes the act of watching makes the watcher weaker. You dragged them into a psychological cage they couldn't escape. They thought they were the ones dissecting you. But all along, you were dissecting them. Their obsessions, their fears, their inability to admit defeat. You turned it all into evidence of their own fragility. And in the end, their intelligence collapsed under your intelligence. Their strategy drowned under your patience. Their years dissolved into your minutes. And now, when people mention you, they don't see a suspect. They see a ghost with sharper teeth than any predator they've ever known. And here's the real kicker. You didn't need to scream your innocence. You didn't need to beg for recognition. You let the years do the talking. You let their wasted labor become your standing ovation. Because when 10 years pass and the target is still untouchable, the case no longer defines the target. The case defines the incompetence of the hunters. That's why you stand taller now. Not because you fought every day, but because you orchestrated a masterpiece of patience. You let their intelligence dissolve into comedy, their operations collapse into dust. And in doing so, you rose, not as a suspect cleared, but as a phenomenon proven. They wanted a conviction. They got a confession instead, not yours, theirs. A confession that they were never capable of catching you, because catching you was never an option. You were playing chess while they were busy counting checkers. And the transition? That's the most savage part. Because now, when your name surfaces in new conversations, it doesn't spark suspicion. It sparks awe. People don't whisper about guilt. They whisper about genius. You didn't just outlast an investigation, you weaponized it. You turned it into your brand, your proof of superiority, your badge of invincibility. That's why you terrify them still. Because investigations end, but legends don't. 10 years was never about proving you guilty. It was about proving you untouchable. And that's exactly what it did. And now we step into the next part of the tale, where this reputation isn't just a shadow you carry. It's the throne you sit on, the crown you wear, The warning label stamped on anyone who dares to underestimate you. Because here's what happens after you turn their obsession into your coronation. They can't touch you without exposing themselves. Imagine the weight of that. For a decade, they stalked you, built dossiers, cross-referenced, interrogated, and whispered in sterile rooms. Yet the conclusion was always the same. You slipped past them. Not because you hid, but because you let them chase smoke while you mastered fire. And now, the mention of your name doesn't raise alarms. It raises heads. Even inside their own walls, your legacy is spoken like a cautionary spell. Careful. Don't let this become another decade-long ghost hunt. You're no longer a suspect. You're a standard. A benchmark of failure so legendary, it made you immortal in the very halls that swore to bury you. 10 years of hunting forged something irreversible. You built a mythos stronger than any verdict. When a person endures a decade of calculated scrutiny and emerges not only clean but magnified, they stop being seen as human. They start being perceived as myth. You've become what they secretly envy. Someone who beat the game without ever needing to leave the board. And that envy, it seeps into everything. Agents retiring with your name in their unfinished files. Analysts admitting defeat. Directors forced to bury reports that cost fortunes. They spent 10 years trying to prove you guilty and ended up proving you greater. Their budgets burned, their reputations bruised, their credibility fractured, all because you were never prey. You were the mirror that reflected their incompetence. And make no mistake, this isn't just about surviving. Survival is cheap. Anyone can crawl through mud and call it resilience. What you did was something different. You turned every camera into a stage light, every document into a shrine, every rumor into advertisement. They wanted to erase you, but they accidentally engraved you into eternity. Do you realize how rare that is? Most people spend lifetimes begging for recognition. You earned it by letting them expose themselves. 10 years is more than an investigation. It's a monument. It's the kind of number history notices, the kind of statistic that makes people stop and pay attention. 10 years, and they still couldn't break him. That sentence alone carries enough voltage to power your legend for generations. And here's the sinister twist. They're not the only ones who noticed. The world has spectators, other nations, other agencies, other watchers in the dark. And when they look at the file of someone who survived a decade of being targeted and still rose untouchable, what do you think they see? A weakness? No. They see a prototype, a superstructure of human resilience, intelligence, and psychological control. You're no longer just someone who slipped away. You've become a point of study. Foreign agencies dissect your legend, not to destroy it, but to learn from it. Enemies whisper your name not with threats, but with caution. Allies speak it with reverence. And rivals? They hesitate, because the thought of outsmarting someone who humiliated an entire investigative machine for 10 years feels like suicide. You've crossed a line they can't erase. They can write new files, open fresh cases, whisper new accusations. But it won't matter. Once someone proves invincible under 10 years of pressure, every future attempt is automatically weaker. It's like trying to cage a dragon after watching it incinerate a kingdom. Nobody takes the cage seriously anymore. You don't just own a reputation, you own time. Because every year that passed under their gaze became part of your arsenal. Every month they failed became another stone in your fortress. And now, time itself bends in your favor. People look at you and see more than a name. They see endurance, they see patience, weaponized. They see 10 years compressed into one truth. You are impossible to break. And let's not forget the human side of their humiliation. Imagine being one of those agents, spending years chasing a phantom, only to realize the phantom was smarter than the entire machinery funding you. Waking up every morning with your career tied to catching someone who turned you into a spectacle. Imagine the sickness in their stomach when they realized they were the clowns in a circus they thought they controlled. You didn't just make them look like fools, you infected their pride with permanent rot. That rot will follow them forever. Retired agents carrying your name like a scar, directors haunted by boardrooms where they had no answers, investigators knowing they wasted years of their lives producing nothing but your myth. You ruined more than their credibility. You ruined their sense of purpose. And the irony, you didn't even have to lift a sword. They fought themselves. They were at war with their own arrogance, their own desperation, their own refusal to admit that someone could stand above them. You turned their weapons into toys, their strategies into jokes, their intelligence into self-destruction. They became characters in your theater, playing roles they never wanted but couldn't escape. And while they collapsed under the pressure of their own expectations, you rose above it, calm, untouchable, unshaken. That is why you terrify them. Not because you fought them, but because you proved that even their best couldn't scratch you. You didn't win a battle, you won the narrative. And the narrative is permanent. Now look at the aftermath. Your reputation isn't just fear, it's gravitational. People orbit around it, drawn to the pull of someone who humiliated a machine built to crush souls. You don't have to shout for respect anymore. The respect precedes you, arrives before you enter the room, lingers after you leave. That's what makes you dangerous now. Not your actions, but your aura. That aura is heavier than steel, sharper than any blade, more final than any verdict. And once someone carries that kind of aura, the world adjusts around them. That's what you've become, the center of an atmosphere that bends reality itself. No investigation, no report, no slander can change that anymore. Because once you humiliate an entire decade of hunters, you stop being just human. You become a gravitational event. And here's the part most people will never understand. This wasn't luck. Luck doesn't survive 10 years. Luck dies in weeks, maybe months. What you had was mastery. Mastery of patience, mastery of presence, mastery of psychological warfare. You didn't dodge their eyes. You made them doubt their vision. You didn't hide your steps. You blurred the concept of movement itself. You didn't play defense. You made the field itself unplayable. That's not chance. That's intelligence, so sharp it bleeds. An intelligence like that terrifies people more than violence ever could, because violence can be countered. But intelligence rewrites the rules, bends the battlefield, dictates reality. And you are the living proof that no investigation, no agency, no decade of surveillance can outthink a mind forged in shadows and sharpened by chaos. So now the question lingers, what comes after 10 years of making them look like fools? The answer is simple. You don't just live with a reputation, you weaponize it. You turn it into leverage, into armor, into a sword. When people know you've humiliated giants, they approach you differently. Their tone changes, their posture shifts, their words tremble. You don't negotiate from the floor anymore. You negotiate from the throne. And thrones aren't begged for, they're recognized. That's where you stand now. Elevated not by wealth or titles, but by proof of dominance so undeniable it restructured the narrative of your enemies. You didn't climb the ladder. You tore it apart and forced everyone else to admit they'll never reach your height and the beauty. They can't rewrite this. History doesn't erase decade-long humiliations. The internet doesn't forget. Whispers don't vanish. Your reputation is tattooed into the collective mind, etched deeper than any verdict ever could be. You don't need to remind people what you survived. The world does it for you. Every time your name surfaces, someone will say it. Didn't they spend 10 years on him and find nothing? That sentence is your eternal crown. That sentence is your revenge. That sentence is your legend. And that legend is why you stand here today. Not as a suspect, but as a ruler. Not as prey, but as proof. Not as a target, but as the one who turned 10 years of investigations into a comedy show, where the punchline was their incompetence. So let them whisper, let them envy, let them try again if they dare. It won't matter, because once you've embarrassed hunters for a decade, you don't fear their weapons. You fear nothing. You've built an aura no bullet can pierce, no report can soil, no rumor can kill. That's your power now. The investigation ended. The legend didn't. And legends, once forged, don't crumble. They expand. They echo. They multiply. And you're walking proof that no decade of scrutiny can cage a mind that was never meant to kneel. And this is only the middle of the tale. Because if 10 years turned them into clowns and you into a crown, imagine what happens next. Imagine the fallout, the empire you build on their ashes, the fear that travels farther than any report ever could. Imagine the world realizing that you didn't just survive the spotlight, you bent it until it burned everyone else. That is the next chapter, and it's coming. Because once you turn an entire decade of humiliation into your fuel, you don't walk into the future. You storm it like an inevitability. Their archives are locked. Their budgets are spent. Their credibility is dust. You are not fighting uphill anymore. You are sitting on the summit with a view no one can deny. This is the part they never prepared for, the aftermath of their failure. They trained for the chase, but they never trained for what happens when the chase ends in their defeat. And now they're choking on it. Agencies that once painted you as a priority are now terrified to even whisper your name. Because the name isn't a target anymore, it's a curse. Mentioning you is admitting that they lost, and institutions built on pride cannot bear that truth. But the world bears it for them. The narrative spread beyond their walls, into cafes, into back rooms, into boardrooms, into bars. 10 years of wasted resources became a punchline the public never forgot. And every time your story is told, it's not a story of suspicion, it's a story of genius. People retell it like folklore, the man they tried to catch for 10 years and failed. The myth that made the hunters look like amateurs, that's not scandal, that's immortality. You've gone from case file to campfire tale, from target to legend. They didn't strip your dignity, they signed your mythology. They handed you something priceless, proof that you are not only smarter than them, but untouchable on a scale too big for their tools to measure. And now, with their failure engraved in history, you become more than just a survivor. You become an empire in human form. Empires don't explain themselves. They don't defend themselves. They don't beg to be understood. They dictate reality. That's what you've become. The proof that a single individual can embarrass an entire decade of investigators and walk away laughing while they drown in their own incompetence. You carry the kind of reputation money can't buy, the kind of respect power can't demand. It's the respect that comes only from defying every prediction, breaking every net, and weaponizing time itself. But here's the part that burns them the most. You didn't just escape. You thrived. Every year they thought was another nail in your coffin became another jewel in your crown. Every agent they deployed became another witness to your brilliance. Every classified update became another reminder that they were burning years while you were building dominance. They thought they were closing in, but all they were doing was circling their own failure. And when it ended, it didn't end with your defeat. It ended with their credibility in ashes. You didn't just survive the hunt, you turned the hunters into your heralds. They screamed your story louder than you ever could, and now the world can't unhear it. And now comes the cruelest twist. You're untouchable not just because of your genius, but because of their mistakes. They can't reopen the hunt without reopening their humiliation. They can't challenge you without reminding the world of their decade-long failure. You are shielded by their shame. You've wrapped yourself in their incompetence like armor, and that armor is stronger than steel. They can't touch you now without bleeding themselves dry. That's why your reputation terrifies them still, because it isn't just about your intelligence. It's about their defeat. Their loss is the skeleton that props up your throne. And every time they see you, they see their failure staring back. And that's where the power multiplies. You've become not only untouchable, but contagious. People around you, friends, allies, strangers, are elevated by association. To be in your orbit is to carry some of that aura, to borrow some of that myth, and to oppose you, to stand against someone who destroyed 10 years of investigations. That's political suicide. That's career suicide. That's social suicide. Because nobody wants to side with the clowns when the circus already left town. You've made it so that even neutrality isn't safe anymore. People have to choose, and choosing against you is choosing humiliation. That's how you control not just fear, but loyalty. Not with contracts, not with promises, but with the gravitational pull of your legend. And the thing about legends, they echo. They outlived the storytellers. 10 years of failed investigations didn't just define your past. They defined your future. You've built a foundation no enemy can shake. You are no longer questioned. You are referenced. You are no longer pursued. You are studied. You are no longer a suspect. You are an empire carved into memory, and that empire expands every time your name is whispered in awe. Think about it. If you stood untouchable against 10 years of concentrated hostility, what could possibly break you now? Nothing. And that's the truth your enemies choke on every night. They couldn't bury you in 10 years. They'll never bury you at all. So what comes next? Power. Pure, unapologetic, untouchable power. The kind that doesn't beg, the kind that doesn't bargain, the kind that doesn't explain. Your reputation has already done the work for you. The narrative is sealed. They chased you for a decade, and they failed. That fact alone is stronger than any defense, any argument, any debate. It precedes you everywhere. People bend their tone when they mention you. Rooms shift when your name is dropped. Because everyone knows what it means. It means you've reached a level beyond ordinary human categories. You're not innocent. You're not guilty. You're beyond both. You're untouchable. You're inevitable. You're the embodiment of a decade's worth of humiliation for your enemies, and the proof of superiority for you. And here's the secret. You don't even need to remind people anymore. The legend maintains itself. Every time someone asks, "Whatever happened with that investigation?" the answer is the same. Nothing. He walked away clean. That answer is more powerful than any speech you could give. Because it isn't you saying it, it's the world saying it for you. Your enemies don't control the story anymore. The people do. And the people already chose their side. They chose awe over accusation. They chose genius over suspicion. They chose you over them. And once the people choose, the narrative is immortal. No agency, no director, no whisper campaign can rewrite it. The myth is already too strong. That's the ultimate humiliation for your enemies. 10 years of surveillance, interrogation, digging, probing, and the only thing they built that was your monument. They thought they were writing your obituary. They ended up writing your epic. And now, they can't escape it. Every time they remember your name, they remember their defeat. Every time they hear your story retold, they hear their own incompetence echoing back. You didn't just make them look like fools for a decade. You made sure they'll carry that label forever. Because history doesn't erase humiliation. It archives it. And your story is archived in fire, in stone, in whispers that will outlast them all. So stand tall. You're not just someone who escaped suspicion. You're the blueprint of untouchability. You're the figure who took 10 years of investigations and transformed them into your coronation. You turned the hunters into jesters, the case into a crown, the decade into your proof of dominance. And now, as the dust settles and the world looks on, one truth stands unshaken. They tried to bury you for 10 years, and all they did was make you immortal. This is the ending they never saw coming. The ending where the suspect became the sovereign, where the hunted became the myth, where the foolmakers were the very ones who swore they were hunters. And you stand untouched, undefeated, unrivaled. 10 years of investigations, 10 years of wasted effort, and you walked away with everything. The crown, the legend, the untouchable reputation that will haunt your enemies long after they're forgotten. That is your victory. That is your empire. That is your immortality.